Hi everybody. This week we're going to talk about weight painting. Weight painting is how we take the influence of our joints and distribute it over the surface of our model to get pleasing deformations. It's important to do that because the way that we bound our skeleton to our character makes for very harsh deformations. A joint is either influencing the vertexes or it's not. And that causes some bends and some crimping and some areas that are moving when a joint moves it shouldn't move. So we're going to go in and we're going to adjust those areas so that we get more pleasing deformations. Now, before we get started with this, I want to be very, very clear. I am not looking for your models to deform perfectly. I'm interested in seeing that you made an attempt to get them to bend and deform nicely, but this is an area where you can fall behind very quickly because it is very time consuming. So please take your best shot at this, understand how it works, and like everything else in 3D, you'll get better at it the more you do it, but I'm not interested in having your character have perfect deformations. If things don't look 100%, it's okay. Um, this is your first pass. This is the first time you've done this, so I'm not expecting perfection. So please keep that in mind. It's very easy to kind of go down the rabbit hole on this one. All right. So rather than show you how to do this on a character, I want to show you on this setup that I have here that's really kind of conceptual. One thing I want to show you is this is the the Canvas site for the class. There's a weight painting tutorial in this week's module that I wrote a little while back. The screenshots look different than what you see currently in Maya because this was written several versions ago, but the concepts here are pretty much the same. So this is pretty detailed. It covers really everything I'm going to talk about. So please use this as an additional resource. Download it, put it on your device, print it out, whatever you want to do. And please feel free to ask questions. So enjoy this. The conceptual part that I'm about to talk about is all in this area, and it explains it fairly in fairly good detail. So that's another resource available for you. Now, some weight painting basics. Joints influence vertexes. When a joint rotates, it's affecting the vertexes of the model. It's not doing the faces or the edges or anything. It's only affecting the verts. And any joint can influence any vertex. That means that a joint in the ankle could influence an elbow vertex. And that's very, very important to understand because you may end up with some deformations that are sort of bizarre and you're not exactly sure why that's happening. It's because any joint in a model can influence any vertex on a model. Some verts are influenced by more than one joint. This is what we're going to be tackling today, is taking the influence from a joint and spreading it out over additional vertexes so that we get those nice pleasing bends, removing the kinks and weird stuff. So the influence value can be distributed to one joint or more than one joint. So you can have a joint that's influencing a ring of vertexes because at 100%, because that's what needs to happen at that point. But as you move away from that joint, usually up the joint chain, you want to have a little bit of a fall off so that things are softer and they move, the verts are influenced a little bit by that joint and then tapering off to nothing. So we'll get into that a little more in just a minute. The influence on the joint on the vert is shown as a black and white map. You'll see what that means here in just a second. White indicates 100% influence. That means that every time that joint rotates, all of that rotation is applied to those particular vertexes. Black means zero influence. So you can rotate that joint all day long. Those vertexes aren't, with black underneath them, aren't going anywhere. Gray underneath a vertex indicates somewhere between the two. So it could be 10% influence, it could be 90% influence, depending on how close to white or black the gray is. The closer the gray is to black, the less influence. The closer the gray is to white, the more influence. And most importantly, the color under the vert is what matters. You'll see a gradation between verts that happens. What that shows is the transition of the influence from a greater or lesser amount to something else. So while you'll see influence indicated on the faces themselves, all it does is indicate transition. It's not showing you that that face is being influenced at all. Remember, right here, the most important thing, joints influence vertexes and only vertexes. Okay? So we've got our model here. It's got 5 joints in it that are rotating, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and our end joint like we talked about last week. I already bound this the skeleton to this object the same way we did in class with max influence of 1 and turned off maintain max influences. So if we rotate these joints, you can see here that while from this point down this joint rotates, it doesn't have to go very far before the geometry starts to get kind of messy. If we look at it over here, and I'm going to go ahead and turn on wireframe unshaded, that's a little easier to see what's going on. You can see it's starting to kink up right there, and if we keep pushing this even to a 90-degree angle, all of a sudden our geometry is folding in on itself, and that's not good. We don't want that. And that's true all up and down the joint chain here. In this case, this piece of geometry is pushing down into the overall shape, and it's still creating a kink. So what we want to do is we want to distribute our weight a little bit more so that we don't have a single joint influencing a row of vertexes anymore. We've got multiple joints influencing it, so those transitions are softer, more pleasing, less crunchy, less folding up on itself. So the way we're going to do that is we're going to select our geometry. When we paint weights, we're painting weights on the vertexes, not on the joints. We're using the joints as reference. We're not painting weights on the joints. Remember, the joints influence the vertexes. In our rigging menu set, we're going to go to Skin and Paint Skin Weights and click on that, and we get this view. Here's our black and white. What this is showing us right now, because we have, I think it's this joint. Yeah, this joint here is selected. It's showing us what the weighting is for this joint. On this row of vertexes, there's no weight at all because we're black underneath those vertexes. And then under these vertexes, it's 100% white, so this joint is influencing those vertexes entirely. We're going to adjust this, and we're going to use our paint paradigm. I'm going to come up here, and I'm going to click on our Tool Settings window. That's where we're going to have this happen. And here are our, let's zoom out a little bit. Here are our joints. Joint 1, and that's what joint 1 influences. Joint 2 influences these. Joint 3 is influencing down here. Joint 4 is down here, and then joint 5 is at the very end. So our goal is to take these influences, let's get that back. Our goal is to spread this out a little bit. So for example, right now, joint 2 is influencing an awful lot of this particular piece. It's even overlapping onto the area that joint 3 should be influencing. Joint 3 should absolutely be influencing this area right here. So we want to shift some of that weight, that joint weighting, to joint 3 here, so that when we rotate it, when we rotate joint 3, these vertexes will rotate, will be influenced. So we're going to go to joint 3, and we're going to use our paint paradigm. Now there's several ways you can paint this. We've got 4 options here: replace, add, scale, and smooth. The ones you want to use are replace and add. You want to avoid scale and you want to avoid smooth. Smooth can happen at the very end, but not while you're doing the base paint. Replace takes the value that's down here in the value field and replaces what's on the vertexes currently with that value. And this is probably by far the most useful of the ways to paint. Add takes this value and adds to whatever's there. And this is a good way to kind of build up your influence. So in other words, if this is at a value of 0.1, if I go over this point right here, this vertex here with the add brush, you can see it gets a little bit gray. And so we've added 0.1 influence to this vert. If I go over it again, you can see it gets a little bit brighter. So now I'm at 0.2. And the more I go over it, the more I can add to it until I get to a value of 1, and then it won't add anymore. Remember, vertexes need to have a total value of 1, and it can be spread out. So I'm going to undo that because that's not how I want that to go. And 23. So replace net. Scale reduces by a percentage. You never want to reduce weight. You always want to add weight. You don't want to reduce it. If you reduce weight, Maya makes decisions about where that weight's going to go, and sometimes it puts it in weird places, and then you end up cleaning up a whole lot more than you would have to otherwise. This is all written out, by the way, in that document that I showed you earlier. So you always want to replace or add. You never want to scale. These are the brush styles right here. It just shows you how each brush works. This brush is called the Gaussian brush, and it has a hot spot in the middle, and the amount of influence that it applies fades off as it reaches the perimeter of the brush. This guy is the soft brush, does the same thing, but it's got a larger hot spot. This is the one I use most. It's the solid brush, and the value that you're applying to the vertex is all the way to the edge. All the way to the edge of the brush, so you always know what you're getting. And this is the square brush. It does the same thing, but it's a square shape. Even though the icon on screen is round, it applies the value in a square shape. So I use this one. The value here is really what we're working with. So this will determine, I'm going to go to add, and this will determine how much extra weight goes on a particular vertex up to the value of 1. And I got off joint 3 again somehow. So we determined when we rotated this that we want to add some value here. The joint is right on this edge loop, so it should be influencing this edge loop, although maybe not 100%, because again, the geometry is fairly close here. We don't want a little kink there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go up gradually. I'm going to go to 0.25 or 25% influence on these vertexes. I can change my brush size by holding down B and clicking and dragging in the window. You want to make sure that your brush is of a size that is only going to hit the vertexes that you intend to hit. If I've got a big brush like this and I start going over this, see how it's overlapping? Even though I'm centered on the vertexes that I want to paint, it's overlapping the vertexes on either side, and it will add to those as well. So I want to make sure my brush is of a size that's only going to hit what I'm after. So here we go. I'm at 0.25, and I'm going to paint all the way around this edge loop to get add some more influence to this joint. And just click and drag, and you can see that as I go, it's changing from black to gray. It's not as bright as the vertex is next to it. Actually, I want to undo that. I'm going to switch to replace because I think I may have gone over a little bit. Replace is the one that I want to use, actually, because I want to keep all of my values even as much as possible, at least early on. So now I've got white here, which means 100% influence from joint 3 on these vertexes. And there's a fairly dark gray right here. And I know that that value is 25% influence right there because the value set here is 0.25. And what that means now is that if I grab this joint and I rotate it, you can see how those vertexes, when before they were absolutely stationary when I rotated this joint, but now they're being influenced 25% by that joint, so they excuse me, they move a little. There's still 100% influence here, which is why that's not moving at all. We could change that if we wanted to, but for the purposes of this demonstration, it's okay. I'm going to do another one. I'm going to get my tool, I'm going to select my geometry, and then go into my toolbox window here. And there's a slot in the toolbox window just above the view options that is the most recent tool. And you can click on this, or if you want to, you just hit G. That brings back up our weight painting tool. And let's go to joint 4 and see what that looks like. Yeah, see, joint 4 had the same issue that joint 3 did, where there's no influence at all on the vertexes where the joint is. So we need to add some. I'm going to still use replace. This time I'm going to go 0.5 just to see show you what the difference is. There's that. And then right into my window, click and drag, and paint my way around that ring of edges. And you can see that here's joint 3, and this is kind of a mid-gray, or a dark gray rather, and then this is 0.5, and that's a middle gray. It's much brighter, which means that those vertexes are going to be more influenced by the rotation of that joint than the ones in joint 3. And you can see it right there when I rotate it. See how those vertexes are moving with the rotation of the joint. Now, when I replace, where's that weight coming from? Remember, I said that the weight has to come from every vertex has to have a value of 1. So what's happening here is when I replace on a row of vertexes, some value like 0.5, as we have down here, what it does is it removes weight from another joint, which is a great way to reduce influence if you find that you have a row of vertexes that are too influenced by a joint. Again, remember, you don't want to take weight away. You never want to use the scale tool to reduce it, because Maya will take it and throw it in weird places. Trust me. So if you need to reduce the amount of influence on a joint, go to another joint and add influence to that joint, and it will automatically pull it away from the joint, the joint that has too much influence. Now, how do you tell how much influence is on a particular joint? That's where this little eyedropper comes in. If you click on the eyedropper and then come over here into the scene and click on a vertex, watch what happens in the value. See how the value jumped to 1? Because that particular vertex has a weight value of 1. If I click on this again and I come over here and I sample right here, watch the value, boop, down to 25. And again, if I get this, I'll highlight it again, get this and come over here and click, we're up to 50%. So this is a great way, and you can sample really any vertex at all. That one has value of 0 because that joint isn't influencing that that vertex at all. So it's a great way not only to tell what's in a particular place, terrific to do before you use replace if you have weight on a joint. Like if I wanted to, let's say I wanted this to be, right now it's 0.25. Let's say that as I rotated this, I found that I needed it to be 0.1. I can come in here, I'm going to get this real quick, and I rotated this, I found out that it was still moving too much, and I needed it to be less. I'm going to use replace, but remember I don't want to take away weight. So I'm going to sample right there. I find that it's 0.25, so what that tells me is in order to reduce that weight, I have to come up here to joint 2, sample it, it's at 0.75, and then if I go to let's go to 0.9, and then I'm going to go over this row of vertexes and get that up there, because the goal is for joint 3 to have an influence of 10% at that point. And then if I sample again, you can see we're now down to 10%. So when I bumped up joint 2 to 90% influence on those verts, it automatically pulled the weight away from joint 3, which created that, it dropped it down to 10% influence. So the sampling tool is great to use if you're going to use replace, because you never want to replace with a value that's lower than what's already there. So before you hit replace and something's got weight on it, check it to make sure that you're going to be replacing with a higher value. If you're not, move up the chain of joint and do a replace on there that reduces the amount to the amount that you're interested in. I know this is a very conceptual idea. We'll talk about it a lot in class. I don't want to bore you with an hour-long video on this, so I'm really just hitting the high points. We're going to cover this in class. Please read the document that's in the module. It's really handy. It's worked out really well for many students in the past, and please feel free to ask questions. I know this can be very confusing. It took me a long time to figure it out because there wasn't really any documentation out there on weight painting. They would all say, you know, weight painting is very important to create pleasing deformations on your character, and then they'd move on to something else. So I've done a lot of digging around on this. I know quite a bit about it. I'm more than happy to help you. The student assistants are also great at it, so please check with me, check with them. Don't let this stop you. Don't let it bring you to a screeching halt. If you're having trouble with it, please let me know and I will help you out. Okay? So have at it. Remember, it doesn't have to be perfect. It just has to look like you actually did some work on it to try and get it to where you wanted it to be. And have fun. It's really kind of cool when you get the deformations working the way you want it to. Oh, the other thing, before I forget, once you got a joint the way you like it, in the toolbox window, you can come over here and you can click on this lock. And as soon as that's locked, you won't be able to change the values for that joint anymore. So you won't be able to add or remove weight accidentally. So once you've got a joint deforming the way you like it, hit the lock button. Now, the only caveat there is if you're locked up like this and you're trying to change joint 1, you won't be able to, because joint 1 is the only one that's unlocked. So in order to continue to change values, you have to have at least 2 joints open. But once you've got it the way you like it, lock it down, and that way you won't accidentally change it. Hope that helps. Read the document, and I will see you in class.